So I was born in the Cayman Islands. It's a small place. You can drive from one side of the island to the other side, the long ways, in about an hour and a half, and that's the big island. That's Grand Cayman. It's known for stingrays, white sand beaches, tourism, all around, and of course the illegal offshore banking accounts that rich people hide their money with from time to time. So my family's from Costa Rica, right there in Central America. Costa Rica is known for Tortuga, the waterfalls, the beautiful climate, and of course the partying. I'm a Costa Rican citizen. Everyone in my family was born in Costa Rica except me, so I was a naturalized citizen. And I've spent a lot of time there. I mentioned Costa Rica and Cayman Islands to give you some of my history, but also because they kind of correlate with one of the more interesting places I've visited, and the one that I'm going to talk about today, which is Cuba. So Cuba, although already having native inhabitants, was quote-unquote discovered by Christopher Columbus in 1492, and was pretty much a Spanish colony the whole time. It was briefly occupied by Great Britain in 1762, but then went back to being ruled by Spain pretty much all the way up until 1902, when Cuba formally gained independence. Fast forward to Fulgencio Batista, who is the latest in a line of dictators that have been not kind to the Cuban people, and more about building good relations with the United States so they can line their pockets and become richer. By around the 1950s, everyone in Cuba was pretty much against the Batista regime. However, the people who would speak out against it were silenced in one way or another. Enter Fidel Castro, a young Cuban lawyer who decides to take military action to dethrone Batista, who got his power from a military coup in the first place. Castro, with a small militia of 138 men, attacked the Moncada barracks on July 26, 1953. The attack was gravely unsuccessful. Castro was caught and sentenced to 15 years in jail. However, he only served 2 before fleeing to Mexico because of being released on amnesty. While in Mexico, Fidel and his brother met a young Argentine doctor named Che Guevara. Having traveled through South America and seen firsthand the poverty of the Latin people, Guevara was also passionate about revolution. Guevara and Castro formed a revolutionary movement called the 26th of July movement. With support for the cause steadily growing, Castro, in December 1956, led a group of 82 fighters aboard a yacht to Cuba. Initially, Che Guevara and Fidel Castro were greeted as liberators, and many soldiers joined the revolutionary cause. With Castro's forces growing, and Batista being under a lot of pressure from the U.S. government, he decided to flee the country on January 1st, 1959, leaving Castro in charge. The United States, although initially believing Castro could be an ally, quickly realized his socialist ambitions when he redistributed wealth within Cuba and shook hands with the Soviet Union. Relations between the U.S. and Cuba would further be strained with events like the Bay of Pigs invasion in April 1961, which ended in a huge failure for the U.S. government, and of course the Cuban Missile Crisis in October 1962. Amidst all this chaos, the U.S. government decided to impose a trade embargo on Cuba. In February 1963, President Kennedy extended this trade embargo to involve no U.S. citizen being able to travel to Cuba and no commercial trade at all with Cuba, later extending it to pressure other countries also not to be able to trade with Cuba. Thus started a time of true isolation in Cuba's history. Cuba was like a snow globe stuck in time. My father recalls from his visit to Cuba that one couldn't find a car past 1950, and this was in the 1990s. My sister, who took most of these pictures and visited Cuba several times, says that people were more honest and trusting in Cuba. Moreover, there was virtually no crime because the punishment was so severe for any violent crimes. On the other side of the coin, my father recalls renting a car from a doctor in Cuba who made $5 a day. Whether you agree with Castro's policies or not, the fact remains that for a time, Cuba became like the Mexican mafia. Hard to get into and near impossible to get out. The general consensus among older Cubans is still a loving affection for Fidel Castro. However, those too young to remember the horrors of the Batista administration may view Fidel as another dictator and a hypocrite. A lot of this began to change when President Obama in 2009 allowed Cuban-American families to not only send money to Cuba but also begin to visit Cuba if they wished. We can look forward to even more substantial changes now that in December 2014, President Barack Obama has announced that the U.S. will be normalizing relations with Cuba. For the first time in over 5 decades, Cuba's borders will once again be open for diplomatic relations. My sister says, and I quote, "Cuba is going to hell now that America is back involved," and she's not the only one who feels that way. However, will these new changes be good or bad for Cuba in the long run? Only time can tell. The only thing for sure is that Cuba won't be so lonely anymore. This is Francisco, reporting from YouTube News, reminding you to stay classy.